Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next episode of my Safe Bet show. It's a great pleasure and privilege to welcome Indiana State Senator Jon Ford on the show. He represents District 38 of the great Hoosier State, having been first elected to the Indiana Senate back in 2014. Senator Ford, Jon, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martin. Thanks for having me and look forward to a great conversation.
And I would suggest, of course, with your permission, that we delve right into it. And I've already mentioned that you're in the Indiana Senate. So let's first of all talk about that. You come from Terrot. Hopefully I'm not mispronouncing it. Terrot, Indiana, in the heart of the Wabash Valley. And prior to running for office, because especially these days, most politicians tend to have, and for a very good reason, a life and career before running for office. You were the president of All State Manufacturing, as well as of the Swope Art Museum and the Indiana Leadership Forum. So as I've said, to kick things off, could you tell us a little bit more about your career pre-politics?
Yeah, so I was involved in manufacturing for most of my early career, and I joined the family business, a food service manufacturing business, as you said, called All State Manufacturing, and really, how I got into politics was through manufacturing and through the arts community. Really, as an employer trying to attract creative people to help me grow my business, I really struggled here in rural Indiana to do that. So that led me to the arts, and really, to attract creative people, we needed a great culture, and that's what I've been working on for many years here in the Wabash Valley.
Has that been an enormous change and cultural shift once you've taken the leap of faith and moved from running a business and employing a number of people to politics? Though I suppose, of course, you continue working for those people, just in a different capacity.
Yeah, it's different. It's it's a slower pace than the business world, and you've got to convince, in my case, 150 other people that your idea is a good idea. So it's not always about what I think. It's about compromise, finding balance, and which is a good thing. And if we do legislation right, we're helping lots of folks along the way.
You hit the nail on the head by putting emphasis on the word compromise. I've only had the privilege and pleasure of having lived this side of the pond for over a year, but it's clear to me and we're filming this for the record on Veterans Day, the 11th of November, so right after the midterms. And at least I've got the impression that unfortunately the country's rather polarized, and not only as a result of the midterms, everybody will need to be looking for compromise to take us all forward. So would you agree with that assessment? At the same time, I don't want to be putting any pressure on you to comment on the result of the midterms. That's not the gist of my question. It's genuinely about your approach to politics.
Yeah, my approach is just what you said. It's all about finding balance and listening to everybody's ideas out there and finding the right, balance for us to move forward. And, I think a good piece of legislation, some say, makes nobody happy. So it's, kind of that, finding that right balance is key. And certainly we could use more of that and some civility in the political world today, for sure.
Indeed, sadly, we can't please everyone, but as long as we please the majority, then I suppose we've done our respective jobs. Before we move on to your role with NCLGs, i.e. the National Conference of Legislators from the gaming states, of which you will be assuming presidency, one final question about Indiana, if I may. This is, of course, not a tourist show, but if you were to invite folks to come over, and especially rural Indiana, where you hail from, what would stand on that invite and what is there to see?
Yeah, I would bring out our natural resources. Terre Haute is a Midwest river town. We have the Wabash River that serves as one of our main focal points in the community. And I would just, promote our natural resources, but then also we're unique and we have 4 institutions of higher education. And I always say that Terre Haute is a great place to live, work, and study.
We've talked about your career pre-politics and politics with a lot of focus on manufacturing. There are manufacturers out there that do produce gambling machines at the same time with the arrival and what appears to be unstoppable rise of online forms of gambling. What was it that really sparked your interest in gambling as a topic or an area you'd like to get yourself involved with?
Yeah, I think as being a small business owner, I'm very entrepreneurial in my spirit. And in the General Assembly, when we knew we were going to have to modernize gaming, I approached leadership about taking that role on. And nobody at the time from Indiana had been attending Nickel G's. So I was assigned that task and really love the environment, the free and open discussion at Nickel G's, and just how other legislators helped me from other states learn about gaming and what the future of gaming held. And, so it was really that focus on, updating gaming here in the state of Indiana, because at the time, all of our casinos were on rivers. We had 2 racinos, but we had not really modernized gaming in 27 years.
And we will most definitely come on to discussing both sports betting and, well, fingers crossed, online casino gambling in the state of Indiana and beyond. But sticking, if I may, to the theme of Nickel G's, and you've already started touching upon it. Now, Nickel G's as an organization, you've set out the key point, which is to bring legislators together. But what are the ultimate objectives? Because you guys get together, invite folks like me and many others, and we have great discussions. But what are the ultimate goals that I'm sure would be designed to help us all, the industry, the legislators, and also the regulators and everybody else who's involved in this space, to move the dial following the 2018 repeal of PASPA? So what is it that the organization is trying to achieve, both in the short but even more importantly in the long run?
Yeah, so Nickel G's, is one of the only organizations of state lawmakers that meets on a regular basis to discuss gaming. So our focus is really to try to bring as many facets of gaming together into an environment of learning and education from the industry and from fellow lawmakers and from regulators. So we try to bring everybody together to really have, the open discussions about the industry and best practices and how to move forward. So certainly when PASPA was repealed, sports wagering for the past few years has been one of the main topics, and really, laying out, good frameworks. So I learned from other states like New Jersey and Pennsylvania who passed it, and we brought some of their language into Indiana's language. And I think other states have looked at what we've done and have copied some aspects of ours. But it's really, I think the main goal of Nickel G's is really, to bring all facets of gaming together to have great discussions about moving forward and what are the best practices, but also to help legislators learn.
And that work is, needless to say, critically important. And I can see 2 themes unfolding. On the one hand, why would anybody need to reinvent the wheel, especially these days with 30 plus states having regulated sports betting? But I take it that at the same time, of course, and we talked about them in the introductory section to this episode of My Safe Bet Show, specific cultural idiosyncrasies need to be reflected, because not everything, arguably, and of course feel free to disagree, that would have worked in the likes of the Garden State or Pennsylvania would necessarily work in Indiana.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think that's what is, I think great about what we have set up is states can pick pieces from other states and put it together to create one great piece of legislation. And to your point, I mean, what some things that worked in New Jersey were not going to work here in Indiana. So we just didn't, take that language and we created some other language. But I think it's, when you look at other states that are moving towards either sports wagering or iGaming, Nebraska, Missouri, Colorado come to mind. Many legislators and their regulators have taken part in nickel G's, and I think seen some of the successes of other states and then maybe some of the failures or things that could be improved on. And I think they're going to have better legislation because of that.
And will that be one of the themes of the upcoming nickel G's winter meeting that will take place under your watch between December 8th and December 11th in Las Vegas? We talked about sports betting and we'll come back to the wider picture. But in terms of the agenda of the upcoming winter meeting, what are the highlights and how many legislators and regulators do you expect to attend the meeting and engage in those discussions?
Yeah, we've got a robust agenda covering on a lot of topics. If I'll list a few, we're going to look at retail gaming, brick and mortar gaming, and how that how that is changing with with iGaming, online gaming, other forms of digital gaming, if you will, and how that has changed their environment. So we'll have a discussion on that. I think a large discussion on the newly enacted federal horse racing regulations. Many states or every state is really having to grapple with this new federal law and how to implement it when it comes to horse racing. Cybersecurity is always a topic. Lottery, we're fortunate enough. We have 3 of the top lottery directors in the country from Georgia, Indiana, and Iowa that are going to hold a panel to talk about the future of lottery. And I think iLottery will also be part of that discussion. Something new that we started a few years ago is we have a panel on diversity and inclusion. And this year, Becky Harris from UNLV will be leading that panel to talk about women in the workforce in the gaming industry. We'll also be discussing cashless casinos, illegal gaming, and obviously we will have kind of a legislative preview on iGaming for 2023. And I believe, Martin, you are going to be a part of that discussion.
It will be my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I can't wait. Indeed, a very, very packed agenda. Perhaps the one theme that I would pick out is diversity. And we've talked about you having taken the leap of faith and joined all the debates surrounding the gambling industry, having been around for a while, and what the industry is usually facing in terms of, well, one of the few criticisms, arguably, is the fact that it's at least perceived as being an old man's club. I think it's fair to say that at most conferences and throughout the industry, the male element, for want of better expression, is still the predominant one. But, and I'm not trying to ask leading questions, so once again, totally feel free to disagree, but throughout the last at least few, if not five years, I've got the impression that the setup of the industry, including senior roles, has been going through material change in terms of bringing more diversity, not just male, female, but other forms of diversity. So I'm sure Becky will tell us much more when we're all in Vegas, but what would be your take on this particular point?
We're definitely seeing movement towards more diversity from folks that are attending from diverse backgrounds that have been coming to participate. But also, I think what we're seeing is, some of this diversity and inclusion has been regulated, right? So, the industry in many states have, obligations to diversify their workforce, their procurement habits. So really, it's really important, I think, that we have these discussions about diversity and inclusion, because not just at the top of the industry, but also who the industry is procuring their provisions from locally is also a very important aspect that I think Becky will touch on a little bit as well.
She most certainly will. So once again, we'd like to invite everybody who will have listened to the podcast between now and then to attend if you can, or at least keep a very close eye on these discussions. Coming back to one of the critical themes that the US industry has been facing, namely sports betting. We've been touching on the repeal of PASPA, and I believe it's fair to say that legalized sports betting, because let's not fool ourselves that illegal forms of sports betting would not have pre-existed the repeal of PASPA. That was one of the goals, of course. Sports betting has taken the US markets by a total storm. So in your view, Senator Ford, what makes sports betting so popular that it's created such a hype throughout the US nation?
Americans love their sports. I think it's in any way to interact with those sports, I think people really enjoy. And I think one of the things that's, I think, helped sports wagering really grow rapidly is when we went into the COVID lockdowns, if you will, and it really became, I think, a source of entertainment for many folks when we couldn't necessarily go to games, or we couldn't, participate in things like we used to pre-COVID. And so I think COVID has had a positive effect on sports wagering. But I think at the end of the day, it really comes back to the roots that we, as Americans, or Hoosiers in my case, we love sports. And, any way to be involved with it, I think as a form of entertainment has really brought out a lot of people to participate in sports wagering.
I should just hope that the Colts will get their act together so that you guys don't have to be going through all those heartbreaks, but that could be a topic for another podcast, because I'm sure we could be talking about football for hours and hours. The markets in Indiana happen to have been one of the first to have jumped on the bandwagon of sports betting regulations. So these regulations, once again, largely throughout the nation, are in the process of maturing, and arguably the states that have regulated would have brought operators in. Now they're in, licenses are getting renewed, but of course the maturing of the markets brings with itself a set of challenges that are much more granular and in-depth than just licensing processes. So in your view, what are the biggest challenges that both the industry and the legislators and regulators face in connection with sports betting?
When my fellow legislators and the public see these large handles, I think then they see the low tax rate. I think there's some assumption there that they're, missing out on a lot of funds. So I think protecting the low tax structures that we've seen across the country in sports wagering is going to be a challenge, I think, as we move forward, because of those high handle amounts. And as we all know, sports wagering, in the gaming industry is a lower margin product than other games. I also think, the integrity. We always have to be concerned that the integrity of sports. So the sports, not necessarily the major leagues like football and baseball, but the other sports that are coming online to be bet on, we need to make sure that they are their integrity rules and regulations in place to make sure that the consumer is protected. And I think that as we expand, I think we're going to continue to see the list of types of sports to continue to be added to sports wagering.
And if I make what I believe is a logical segue into online casino, or if you will, online gaming, including poker, and you've been, if not then one of the leading proponents of online gaming regulation in Indiana and throughout the Midwest. So perhaps the place to start is doing a bit of a compare and contrast. 30 plus states to have regulated sports betting, sports surfing on the wave of the hype and, as you put it, the infatuation of the American nation with sports, and yet again for good reason. Then only 7 states, with Nevada being a bit questionable and dubious in that regard, that have taken the plunge and regulated online casino. So why do you think the online casino or iGaming regulation has been such a slow burner? And if I may ask, because that's what everybody would love to hear about, what can we expect from the next year's legislative session in Indiana? Will our online gaming get regulated?
I think, part of it, I think, is a little fatigue. PASPA happened. We, rushed into sports wagering, a lot of discussion in legislatures across the country. And I really think, there's been a little fatigue. I think going into COVID, some of the past legislative sessions recently haven't been full on legislative sessions. Gaming, as you know, Martin, it's very detailed, in the weeds kind of legislation, and it does wear out on some legislators, because there are some in every body that are uncomfortable with it, and we have to navigate that. But I do think moving forward, I think you're going to see a number of states bring this up. I think Illinois, Indiana, New York, and Ohio, I think it'll all be on the table. I think here in Indiana, we're going to have a robust discussion, I think, on iGaming and iLottery. And if I had to do it over again, I probably would have copied what Michigan did and done iLottery or iGaming and sports wagering at the same time. I think that was a tactical mistake that we made here in Indiana. And I'd recommend other states that are thinking about sports wagering that haven't passed it yet to include iGaming with it.
Indeed, I would totally agree. It would appear rather bizarre, I suppose, for the reasons we've discussed this morning. It would appear rather bizarre to have separated sports betting and iGaming, but we are where we are. But it's good to hear that, as usual, what I would call the cluster effect still seems to be working, because I should hope that if you guys in Indiana get it over the line, then that will prompt the likes of Illinois into action. And of course, at the same time, everybody will be looking at our good friends, Senator Addabbo and Assemblyman Pretlow in the state of New York, because they seem to be hell-bent on getting iGaming in their state across the line in the next year's legislative session. Moving on to a topic that comes hand in hand with any regulation, and once again, you've been quite hot and big on that topic, and that's clamping down on the sadly still existing black market. You made that point in quite a few interviews that I had an opportunity to read. So what, in your view, is the recipe to go about that? Regulate, I suppose, but then would we need to get the likes of the internet service and payments providers involved? And also, how can we educate customers about the differences between the legitimate license market, people who pay taxes in states like Indiana, and that other folk that just seems to be piggybacking off misinformation and trying to attract people to go down the route of unprotected and illegal gaming?
We talk about, iGaming. I mean, the reality is iGaming exists in every state here in the country, currently, be it illegal. So I do think, obviously, bringing it into a regulated market is the first step. I do think we need to, as a country, have more discussions with internet service providers and payment providers to crack down on these illegal games, because as we all know, it's without regulation, problem gaming is much larger, with people who are, for lack of a better term, in the dark, and bringing it into the light to allow regulation and regulators to monitor things, implement our responsible gaming procedures. I mean, I think that's also a big part of this is we've got to do a better job, I think, educating our communities on illegal forms of gaming that are out there. And I think that's a role that, responsible gaming policies can play, is really educating not only the industry workers and gamers themselves, but also the communities that they live in, that this does, there is illegal gaming out there on the internet. People can access it from their phones, and really bringing, talking, having more discussions about it in our local communities, I think would be a positive way to combat it, as well as many others. And at the Nickel-G's meeting, we are going to have a big meeting on illegal gaming, where we're going to be bringing, some of the industry folks that are working on this, and many of them are former law enforcement, from U.S. attorneys to Secret Service agents. So we're going to have a great panel on that I'll be leading Sunday morning of the Nickel-G's conference.
Indeed, an absolutely critical topic, and the industry's privileged to have folks like you that lead and help us lead the charge literally against the illegal black market operators. And as you've also pointed out, customers stand to benefit from it once we've completed that job and managed to put ourselves in a position whereby there are no unlicensed operators throughout this country. Ultimately, this show is called Safe Bet Show for a reason, and yet another key theme that is on the agenda of the upcoming winter meeting of Nickel-G's is indeed responsible gambling. You've assembled a team of people that are in the throes of producing a responsible gambling regulation. So if I may ask yet again about the objectives and the rationale behind that resolution, and also in your capacity and from your perspective of a legislator, one of the key legislators when it comes to gambling throughout the nation, what does a good and efficient responsible gambling program look like?
Yeah, so at Nickel-G's, we've spent the last few years, as you said, gathering the facts, getting key stakeholders to the table to really create a resolution that we hope will serve as a model legislation across the country, kind of the top priorities of a great responsible gaming program. As we've done that, we're working with UNLV and Spectrum Gaming to create this document. We will be taking input at our winter meeting and hopefully voting on it as a body next summer, and then getting that out across the country. In terms of what I think responsible gaming programs, I think I think states need to clearly state that, that states that have gaming, that they believe in responsible gaming and creating environments where people can play this form of entertainment and feel safe and have consumer protections. But then also we need to fund it. We can't just say it. We need to back it up and provide funding for hotlines, education, research, and the like. And that education, needs to be within the industry of the grassroots workers, but also communities. We need to be out in communities, talk about responsible gaming, similar to what we do when we talk about safe drinking or safe consumption of alcohol. We talk about that in the public. We need to also do that, in my opinion, with responsible gaming.
Amen to that. Indiana, as I'm sure folks will most definitely know, plays host to the NCAA headquarters, and the Entain Foundation US lately announced a partnership with the NCAA, arguably the first online gambling operator, rather its charity arm, to have partnered with the NCAA to educate college athletes and beyond the college communities. What teams nationwide do you believe will do well, and what will be the fate of the surely closest to your heart, Indiana-based teams?
Well, here in in Indiana, the falls tend to be very long for us as we're not really a football state, and so many of us always look forward to the start of the basketball season. Basketball, is in the DNA of Hoosiers, and we love our basketball from high school all the way through to NBA teams, and I think. This year, I think we have got a few teams that are going to do well. I think the University of Indiana basketball team, I think will have a great season and hopefully will do well in the NCAA tournament. But Notre Dame and Purdue also, I think, will have very, very competitive teams moving forward.
Indeed, marquee names. Ladies and gentlemen, now is the time to give Senator Jon Ford final 60 seconds to convey his messages of choice, ideally about gambling, but feel free to talk about anything else. So Jon, please, your 60 seconds before we wrap it all up. What is it you would like to tell the folks out there?
I think, really the message I'd like to convey is if you're a legislator or a member of the industry out there, please come be a part of Nickel G's and a part of the gaming discussion nationally, because we are always seeking stakeholders' input and other views, and always trying to continue to move the industry forward in a safe and regulated manner, but also to have that form of entertainment. I think gaming has grown in terms of here in Indiana, from being in small river towns to being a great form of entertainment for so many folks in our state. But I, would encourage as many folks as possible to, from industry and legislators, to attend Nickel G's. And again, I appreciate this opportunity, Martin.
The pleasure was entirely mine. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, see you all at Nickel G's, and this has been one of the leading U.S. legislators when it comes to gambling, manufacturing, and few other themes and areas, Senator Jon Ford. So thank you very much again. My name is Martin Lycka, and this has been the latest episode of my Safe Bet Show. See you next time.